The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. We have not talked about Alex Jones, propagandist Alex Jones, for a little while, or at least it feels like we haven't, which is a good thing, I will mention. But he is back in the news. There is now child porn swirling around Alex Jones. I don't even know where to start with this because the story kind of goes back years to Alex Jones's crazy conspiracy theories related to the Sandy Hook shooting in Newton, Connecticut that took place at this point. I don't even know how many years ago it was, but it's been many years since that shooting. And the latest revelations are that some of the material that Alex Jones turned over to the families of Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting victims who were suing him contained images of child porn, according to a court filing. And what the latest I saw Alex Jones alleging is that this child porn was planted within what he turned over in order to make him look bad. And he has been interviewing like his lawyer on his program. I've actually checked out some of the stuff over the last few days, Pat, and it is very, very crazy. And I don't know what the truth is, but his lawyer's explanation involved metadata related arguments claiming that the child porn that was connected to the documents Alex Jones turned over was never actually accessed by Alex Jones, and therefore that's proof that it was planted. I mean, it's all so insane to even keep up with.
Well, there's always an element of conspiracy when you're talking about Alex Jones. He couldn't just come up with the simplest explanation. He has to make this part of an elaborate scheme, and that it was all the lawyers of the opposing side trying to put him up to this and trying to show that he has child porn on his computer. That's not what happened here, though, I don't think. I think maybe just InfoWars being a big company, having a lot of crazy viewers, they were probably sent emails with child porn attached to it. There's no evidence that the child porn was ever looked at. There's no evidence that Alex Jones personally sent anyone child porn. So that explanation I actually buy, if that's what it was, that it was just sent to him by a viewer and maybe a bunch of documents were subpoenaed or whatever. They had to send it over to the opposing lawyers, and they just sent it in mass without reviewing anything. And lo and behold, this child porn just happened to be in those files. But I think you could easily come up with a way to excuse that. Being a big company, having so many fans, Alex Jones could just say this was done mistakenly. I had no involvement in it. But instead, he has to try to make it seem like it was an elaborate scheme put up to by the opposing lawyers. Like, you don't have to do that stuff.
Yeah, and in fact, he seems to have gone so far overboard that he's also now accused of threatening Christopher Mattei, who's a lawyer for the families that are suing him, as well as his law firm, during a broadcast late last week. And, listen, I don't have any reason in particular to believe that Alex Jones likes child porn or watches child porn. I mean, there's just absent evidence of that. That is not my default belief. It's just that, as you're pointing out, when you start hurling wild accusations and conspiracy theories that also go beyond the known facts, it raises red flags and it makes people ask even more questions. There was an instance where, some people have emailed me and said, David, don't you remember when the camera, the overhead camera that Alex Jones has, spotted transgender porn on Alex Jones' phone? Like, it's not a far stretch to think that he's also into child porn. It's like, no, it's a pretty far stretch still to go from adults to kids. Like, no matter what it is that he's into when we're talking about adults, I still think that it's not fair in any way to say, obviously, if you're looking at transgender porn, you're probably also looking at child porn. No, I think that those two things don't follow.
Yeah, that's a leap that I certainly would not make. And how crazy is it that Alex Jones is in trouble right now because of things that he made up about the Sandy Hook families? And now he's going on air making things up about the lawyers of the Sandy Hook families, saying that they put him up to this. And then I think later, once the broadcast is over, he has to sort of retract those statements and apologize to the lawyers because he is, in a sense, defaming them. But he either can't control himself while he's live on air, or he just figures that the risk is worth it because he knows that it's good entertainment for his viewers.
Well, there's another irony that you didn't mention, which is the irony that he constantly is making things up about other people, and now all of a sudden he says, I'm the victim, everybody's making things up about me, when he's built a career of making things up and making fraudulent claims about others. That's the second layer of irony.
Yeah, and honestly, I hope that we hear less and less of Alex Jones as the years go on. He has been deplatformed. It's a lot harder to look at his content and to find his content. I'm not just like stumbling across YouTube videos of him anymore.
No,
So,
fortunately.
well, he'll be in the news for a little bit, but I hope not too much longer.
Hey, here's something interesting. Is from a new study which says that so-called puppy eyes, the what appear to be the expressions communicated by dogs, have evolved particularly to appeal to humans. And this is so interesting because I've talked with a lot of people before about how they perceive that their dog's eyes are extremely expressive, and they interpret those expressions in the context of human emotions, right? Sadness or a deliberate look of pity in order to garner treats or food or whatever the case may be, right? And what's absolutely fascinating about this is that while there is no evidence that we are right to attribute human sort of emotions and agency to what may look like it's being communicated by the eyes of dogs, the study shows that if you basically it's Darwinian selection. If the dog had the ability to do certain things with its eyes that ingratiated them with humans who were around them and made the humans more likely to give them food or to let them stay around, the dogs were more likely to live long enough to procreate and thus pass on the genes that allow for more what we might call the appearance of human expression by the dog's eyes. Absolutely fascinating, not hugely surprising, but still, Pat, we want to be careful. Not evidence that what looks like a human type expression on a dog's face is anything more than evolutionary selection.
Yeah, this all still rings true to me, though. You can definitely identify a dog with puppy eyes who is trying to get you to give him some food or whatever. Just at least pay some attention to take it outside or whatever it may be. But I don't know. I feel like I've been manipulated here.
Yes.
Like the dog isn't doing it on purpose, but he's doing it through thousands of years of evolution. And that just doesn't sit right with me.
Well, listen, I mean, I think what we're learning is that it's not the dog's fault. It's just evolution. This is not a manipulative dog. It appears as though humans have an unconscious preference to protect and feed and therefore encourage the procreation of dogs that have these traits that have a particular effect on the human psyche. When we look at the dog that appears to have the bigger eyes and what we might call dog eyebrows, so to speak, dog owners and people who have been around dogs will know what I'm talking about, that mimic human expression. And that's what's amazing. I don't know that, there's folks like Richard Dawkins who call it the beauty of evolution. I don't know that that is exactly the word I would apply to it, but it is the striking nature of how the dog isn't doing anything. By virtue of having a particular trait, it was more likely to survive because of how humans reacted.
Well, it's important that we are aware of these biases and that we know that not all dogs may have this. So the dogs that don't have so many emotive expressions, like maybe you have a tougher time connecting with them on that eye level, that you also give them all the love and attention they need because
it's not a bad dog if it can't do this. A Confederate statue in Nashville's Centennial Park was vandalized late Sunday evening with the words, "They were racists," written in red paint. This is a statue that was built almost 50 years after the end of the Civil War. It was meant or is meant to be a memorial to Tennessee soldiers that fought in the war. And paint was poured over the names of more than 500 soldiers inscribed on a plaque on the monument. And now police are reviewing security footage and all of that stuff. This is not the first time that there has been such vandalism. Last April, a college student poured red ink and some of her own blood onto a Confederate monument at the university campus, and that monument has since been removed. So there's a couple things here to discuss. I mean, number one is the ongoing question of whether having the monuments at all is racist, even if the motivation for the Civil War by the South, big picture, was states' rights to continue having legal slavery, which we agree it was, and historians agree. Does that mean that any monument is inherently racist? I tend to think that it sort of is. Like, it's not necessarily saying anything about the individual in the monument, but it doesn't change the reality that this was fundamentally a race-based war within the United States. But then there's the question of whether removal is a solution of sorts or whether it is erasing a really ugly reality of America's past. And there are diverging views on those two issues.
Yeah, I tend to think that we should take down the Confederate monuments and perhaps put them into a museum, because then when you're in a museum, you kind of look at these things through a historical context and you understand that we don't necessarily celebrate these things anymore. Whereas if you have it in the town square at a public park, it looks as if it's still something that should be revered, and I don't want to be sending that message. I suppose a slippery slope argument can be made with this here, though. Like, if you have a Civil War monument for the Confederacy with "they were racist" spray painted over it as vandalism, would it, I initially kind of agree with that protest. I like that people are out there doing that in a sense. Don't want to endorse lawbreaking here, but I think it's important that people get that kind of visual understanding. You could maybe say the same thing about some of the Revolutionary War heroes that we have in this country. Many of them owned slaves. Many of them could not have foreseen living in a world without slavery. If the same thing had been done to a statue of George Washington and, a bunch of names listed of people who died serving in the Revolutionary War, and someone put a bunch of spray painted red paint on it or whatever, and they were racists, the same thing the same message would be true in a sense. But for me, it just doesn't feel the same. And maybe it's because the Confederacy was fighting specifically for the purpose of slavery,
I think that's
whereas the Revolution, it wasn't.
I think that's the difference, because there's no question that there were racists and slave owners and whoever else that were part of the Revolutionary War to achieve independence from England. There's no question about that. But the basis of the war was not to keep slaves. And that doesn't excuse any particular slave ownership at the time. Of course not. But it's different than saying we believe that keeping slaves is so important that we are going to go to civil war within our own country in order to preserve it. I do think that is two different things. And then lastly, on the tail end of this, there have been suggestions that this may have been a false flag vandalization, that these were actually pro-Confederate people who wanted to make the anti-Confederate, the pro-Union side, appear like bad people so that it was a false flag. No actual evidence of that, though.
Yeah, maybe it's this false flag is being perpetrated by the same people who put child porn on Alex Jones's computer. I don't know if that would be much of an overlap that makes sense, but I think it's just about as likely to be the case as these other false flags being true.
Yeah, absent any evidence, I'm not ready to make that claim. I'm just telling you, people are talking, and it's something that people have said. That does it for today's bonus show. New bonus show tomorrow. Thanks for joining me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.